Good morning. Being winter time, I've been working on just learning a few ice fishing patterns for trout. And this one is going to be a jig with a nice marabou tail. Bead head, obviously. Got a size 16 jig hook in the vise here. It's just going to have a wire body, abdomen, and then we'll finish it off with some pearl ice seven. So for the tail, I'm just going to use this piece of white marabou feather, and what you'll find is that you can kind of stroke this up towards the tip. And what I'm going for is to try to get these tails in alignment and just the right size. We're going to cut most of this off. So there we go. Our measurement is going to be right about, if I want it about the length of the shank of the hook, or maybe a tiny bit longer. That is about where I want to be. So we'll take a couple of good tight wraps here, and then we'll take a look and just make sure on our length. And yeah, that length is looking great to me. So we'll just go ahead. I'm going to take a few wraps forward to further secure this marabou feather down. And I don't want to go too far up. As I've been tying this, a couple of things. You want a taper on this, and so if I take this marabou too far up, I just start building up too much bulk. I don't want that, so I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that bulk. So once I have that trimmed back a little bit, let's go ahead and finish clamping this down. So I'm just going to take some pretty tight wraps here. I'm using a Vivus GSP in white, so it's pretty dang strong thread. And I really want to compress that marabou as we work back to our tie-in point for our wire. So for the abdomen, I'm just going to turn to some Chartreuse extra small wire. Cut myself off a fairly long piece just because I don't want to end up short while I'm shooting a video. So let's go ahead and secure that down back behind the bead. I'm going to want that to drift over the backside lens side of the hook. And I'm just going to bring my thread back to secure the wire down back to the spot where I want to begin this abdomen. And from there, we're just going to kind of work on some tapering. Obviously, I'm too thick back here, and I need to get some thickness up front. So we're going to kind of just fill that in. So once I filled in a little bit, I've got that taper going a little bit. I'm going to smooth the body out by rotating my thread counterclockwise, which will flatten it out. And that's just going to help us create a nice smooth transition from front to back. It's really important when you're doing these wire bodies to make sure what the wire is laying over doesn't have a lot of bumps, a lot of variations, and it will just help that wire lay down better. So hopefully you can see that on camera here, where that thread is getting a little bit more spread out, which is what I'm looking for. That's just going to lay down a broader layer of thread. That is going to be a lot smoother in its transition from the thinner taper up to the larger taper. So as I've noted before, I'm not a professional fly tyer, so I will take some extra time. I'm not trying to pump these things out one right after the other, so I'll spend the necessary time on this abdomen piece just to make sure I've got the nice flat taper. Okay, we've got our bobbin cradle in place. What we're going to try to do here is take touching wraps, and that's going to be a little bit challenging just because it's extra small. But these first few wraps are going to be really important because everything is going to kind of follow them up the shank of the hook. So once I've got it there, we'll go ahead and take our thread off of our bobbin cradle. I'm going to turn my cradle and just get that out of the way. We're going to take our thread and we're going to take a wrap over the top of that wire, just locking it in place. I'm going to take a wrap or two on the other side of that wire. From there, I can just, this extra small is just going to break off really easily. So a couple of things here. One, I'm going to put my dubbing in a dubbing loop here, and it's just this Ice Dub UV Pearl. I've got a nice little clump broken out here that's going to go into the dubbing loop. And there's going to be a lot of trimming involved after this, but I have tried to break apart some of this dubbing so that I could break apart some of the longer fibers. But once we've got that in our dubbing loop like that, just go ahead and spin our dubbing tool. You'll start to see that knot up. Dubbing loops, for me anyway, work better for when I can get away with it. Dubbing's like this ice dub, which is very coarse. dubbing. So it can be a little bit hard to finger dub, but if you do a dubbing loop, it does just a very nice job. You can see I'm just going through this string here and picking out some of the larger clumps. And as I said, we're going to end up doing some cleanup on that afterwards. So I've got that all in place. We're just going to go ahead and start wrapping our collar. Some of these wraps are going to be a little bit overlapping just because I want to build up a relatively beefy collar here. That's probably going to be just about enough, and that's one of the other reasons I like to use a dubbing loop. They do take a little bit more time, but I've got my dubbing here, and it's just like another material that I tie in. So now I can tie off that dubbing loop with my thread. Making sure I'm going over the top of that. So I've got it secured down with a couple of wraps there, and I'm going to take a couple of wraps right behind the bead. And from there, again, this is one of the things I like about the dubbing loop, is I can now just take that dubbing loop and we're going to cut it off. So as you can see here, we've got a lot of spiky things coming out. I'm going to start just by stroking some of those backwards, trying to capture them a little bit with a couple of thread wraps so that they're more inclined to lay backwards. You can see some are still jumping out, but that's okay. We'll clean those ones up. So I've got this far. I'm just going to go ahead and do our final whip finish. Then we can remove the thread. We'll come on in and we will trim up that collar to make it a little bit more manageable. I like it to look buggy, but you got to be careful how buggy you want it to look. So now with our thread removed, I'm just finding these longer ones and cutting them a little bit shorter. I'm not cutting them off, just shorter. This is, again, not that I'm advertising for it, but one of the many amazing features of a rotating vise is allowing you to just kind of turn your hook, different angles. With that, we're pretty much done. Let's just call this the Marabou Ice Jig. Quite often when I see this pattern tied, I didn't invent it. You can change the look of this a little bit by changing the color of the wire. I would always keep the white tail, and I'd keep the pearl dubbing up there. But a lot of ice fishing flies are going to be blue rather than chartreuse. This is just giving me an alternate to use out on the lake. But most commonly I'll tie it in more of a blue color. When I tie it in a blue color, it's going to look more like this. So that's it. If you ice fish, give this one a shot. Even if you don't, it's kind of fun to tie. Throw yourself a hook in the vise, give it a go.